Hey y'all, welcome to Heat The Skillet, a podcast sizzling up hot takes over a flame and dishing out personal stories. Here, we serve a little bit of everything, and it's all made with that southern soul. This is your host, Willow Lawson, with my co-host, Eliana Wexler and Noah Wilburn. This week, we are here to dive into the foods, flavors, and cultures that we folks associate with the American South. It'll all start with a peek into the crock pot, looking into the origins of Southern cuisine and how it's slow cooked into what we know today. Then, we will consult a local academic on her 2 cents on the meaning of the word Southerner and what the modern-day South looks like. For dessert, we will have some personal stories from our guest speakers about Southern food and its personal meanings to them. So, grab your fork and pull up a chair. Let's have a chat over a nice, hot skillet. I want to go into our connections with the term Southerner. Why don't you start, Eliana?
Absolutely. So I grew up here in North Kakalaki, up here in the South, and something about my Southern identity starts with my name. My real name is Eliana or Eliana, but because I am in the South, it's usually turned into Eli-Anna in the classic antebellum way. But I grew up in quintessential suburbia in Raleigh, and I have had a unique experience with both my Jewish tradition and also my Southern tradition, especially culinary-wise. So on one hand, I'd have grits with butter or polenta, cornbread, cabbage, even black-eyed beans. But then on the other side, I would have Mediterranean-style fresh salads and a spice cabinet that takes up half my pantry, and chicken with yogurt, but not like fried chicken. This is the kind of the unique way that I grew up. And another aspect to that is the unique angle I have on Southern food, because I was not always or never able to partake in the unkosher yet delicious smelling, like the sizzling bacon or the drippings or any of the Southern food that is so a part of unkosher foods. So that's my spiel.
It's so interesting that you bring that up, because I am reflecting and realizing that my experience of the South is extremely unkosher. I grew up in Mount Airy, North Carolina, which is just on the edge of the Appalachian region of North Carolina. And my mother always had bacon grease sitting on the stove to cook our eggs in, to cook our cabbage in. There was always bacon in our fridge. My grandmother, who grew up in tobacco farming, her earliest memories are of her family going out to butcher the pig that would feed the family for the whole year. But for me, my memory is mostly of cornbread, which is stereotypical, but it is still very endearing to me. I remember my mom always cooking it in bacon grease in my great-grandmother's cast iron skillet. Ironically, my mom had a complicated relationship with Southern food because of diet culture and whatnot, but when she wasn't on one of those heydays, we would always have like peach zonker or blueberry zonker, which is very particular to the Mount Airy region, as well as ground steak sandwiches, which are Great Depression meals. But to me, that is very much a part of the South and rural culture. But kind of moving away from rural culture, Mount Airy isn't very far from Winston-Salem, which is where Noah's from. So Noah, let's hear a little bit about your experience.
So having grown up in Winston-Salem, I'm Southern in a geographical sense, as North Carolina is quite Southern in most regard. But I'm growing up in what is a decently sized city, so I'm far from a rural Southerner. On top of that, my family is not originally from the South. My mother is from Florida, so Southern that it's not really even Southern anymore. It's just other like Caribbean cultures and cultures from those who moved there. And my dad grew up in northern Washington state, which is West Coast more than anything else. So my Southern experiences have been primarily through my community, be that friends and their families. And so I would consider myself a Southerner on the basis of having spent a majority of my life growing up there, but I would consider myself more shallowly involved within the culture.
Noah, you just used the term shallow, the word shallow. What do you mean by that?
So by shallow, I would say that I don't think being Southern is like a conscious part of my identity. I'm not constantly thinking about how I am Southern. I've just grown up within the region. And so I've definitively had Southern experiences. I've been to those backyard cookouts, those church potlucks. However, at the very same time, my family is not Southern. And so much of my home life being influenced by my father's West Coast / Northern upbringing and my mother's Southern upbringing. Like, my household has not been very what I'd call Southern. However, being within the region and interacting with Southern groups, I've picked up on some of the same values of like community and family. But I would say that the life I have lived is far from that of a true blue Southerner.
I think that's a very beautiful and helpful perspective, Noah, especially as we're entering this conversation of who even is a Southerner, who counts as a Southerner, who is claiming to be a Southerner, who isn't claiming to be a Southerner. I talked with Dr. Kelly Alexander, and she provided some insight. She is a professor in the American Studies Department who calls herself a food studies evangelist. Here is Dr. Alexander in response to, how do you define the South?
I think it is a mistake to define the South or Southernness in geographical borders. Mm-hmm. So now that I have said that, I think of the South generally as the Southeast below the Mason-Dixon line, and I have asterisks by Texas and Florida. I'm from the state of Georgia. I identify pretty strongly as an Atlantan. When I do that, I have to explain to people that both of my parents were born and raised in Atlanta, since it's a big transient city, and there's been a saying that no one is a native Atlantan, that I am a native Atlantan and a generational native Atlantan, which is a very Southern thing in and of itself, which is to establish how Southern you are and how many times Southern you are. But I think in general, Southernness is an ethos that is related to being from a really complicated place that the world pays attention to for its horrible legacy of slavery and its unique cultural expressions and productions. You could say the same thing about other places with complicated histories, California, New England, but the distinctive combination of a really bloody, really painful history and really defined habits and practices all rubbing up against each other, to me, makes the South the South.
So now onto the fun stuff of food. What makes Southern food distinct from every other cuisine?
You always want, when you talk about the South, to not reduce every single thing to the Civil War. But what you can do is think about a plantation economy and a farming food reality. We are talking about hot places and crops that grew here or were grown here or were appropriated here because of their ability to withstand very hot temperatures. I think like ultimate Southern crop is like Carolina Gold rice. That's a great example, which is African but thrived here, and it tells the whole story of the South in that crop. And now it's a special commodity. It's expensive on the market. People seek it out, but the history of that explains so many things about Southern food. It's an agrarian-based economy that also came from people who were cut off from the Union for a big, long while and who relied on other people's labor to cook and grow food. And all of those things have created a kind of food system. But when we're talking about Southern food, I'm talking about something that is historic and comes from practices that have evolved over centuries of time. They're related to the land. And the French have this really lovely term for it. They call it terroir, and they use it mostly in the wine industry. That means the taste of place. It means the sense of the specialness of the soil and what that gives to crops. And so things that I think of are Southern are things that have grown here for a really long time. that people have learned how to make the most of, and the practices that are associated with them.
What do you think is the biggest misconception you see outside of the South about Southern food?
Well, the biggest misconception about the South in general is that the people are stupid because we talk slowly or more slowly, and that translates all the way down to the food, right? That the culture in the South is low, and the culture in the South comes from uneducated people who talk slow, walk slow, and are backward, and it translates all the way to food systems, right? Like judgments about soul food and Southern food, and it's not good for you, and it's backward, just like the people are backward, really annoy the hell out of me. It's just not true. It's just the skill that is required and the knowledge that is required is so undervalued because it's Southern that it frustrates me. The fact that Southern food isn't considered high art and it's considered low culture is deeply insulting, especially to women who are largely making it, especially to African people from whom it largely comes from.
In response to arguments that the Southern diet is too high in carbs or fat, she says this.
You can certainly have fried chicken, a piece of fried chicken, and also a kale salad and survive and be a happy person who doesn't die of heart disease.
I agree. Probably a happier person than some people as well.
Well, I think that counts. I think that counts, right? You should be able to eat some things that are delicious to you, and it's fine.
Speaking of things that are delicious, what is your favorite memory revolving around food? Maybe specifically Southern food, but it doesn't have to be.
Oh, gosh. I'll give you two. Most of my favorite food memories are all about cooking in the kitchen with my grandmother. My grandmother was an absolutely amazing self-taught baker. She moved to Atlanta after World War II. She was from the Bronx. She was an only child, and she grew up. My great-grandfather owned like a truck stop sort of restaurant in the Bronx. My grandmother moved to the South after World War II with my grandfather. They knew no one. They moved to Atlanta, and they made some friends. They got involved in a Jewish community there, and my grandmother loved to bake, especially lots of Jewish food. She's of Hungarian Jewish descent, and so when I was growing up, my grandmother didn't get to go to college. It was her great regret in her life. And so she had two daughters, my mom and my aunt, and she never really taught them to cook. They're proficient, like they can put dinner on the table, but they don't have any special love for it. She had the idea that if they knew how to cook well, or it was a special skill of theirs, they would be stuck in the kitchen, which she felt she was.
Wow.
So in fact, they became professional people and they had jobs, but the result of that was that my grandmother was stuck taking care of me when I was a little kid. And, by that point, she had sort of softened about all of that, and I was her kitchen helper, which was to me like the greatest job in the world because I could be alone in the kitchen with my grandmother doing all this fun stuff, and then people valued me and my family. And she wasn't like the kind of cook like now, like helicopter parenty, like I had my own little kid knife and my own little kid apron. Like I was climbing up a ladder and like cooking stuff on a hot stove and getting burned and figuring it out and using a big knife to chop stuff. And I loved it. I just loved it. And so the happiest food memories in my life are making challah with my grandmother, making mandelbrot, these little Jewish almond cookies with her, that kind of thing, making matzo ball soup, just the two of us listening to big band on the radio. That you couldn't have learned to love cooking more. I felt very grown up and sophisticated, and like I was an essential part of helping do all this, make all these delicious foods. It was all I ever wanted to do. Was do that more and talk about it and write about it.
What do people often forget when considering the South?
Being Southern can be a matter of degree, and that's fine. Like you don't have to be wearing overalls and tending a pig to be Southern. It can be something that you carry around with you.
A special thank you to Dr. Alexander for lending us her precious time. As we move into our interviews with fellow students at UNC Chapel Hill, we seek to investigate how people are carrying around their pocketbooks of Southernness. We start with a Northerner.
We wanted to hear from someone who wasn't raised on cornbread or grits, but found herself surrounded by both. Maeve Carroll grew up in Long Island, New York. She's proudly Northern, Catholic, and unapologetically loyal to bagels and pizza. But what does a Long Island Catholic girl know or think she knows about the American South?
Growing up the South, imagine like it was very like, oh, it's like people who can't read, you know what I mean? Like, that was a very backward way of looking at it. It always felt not foreign in a way, but just so different to everything I grew up with knowing. It's not one thing. The South is not one thing. You can't even define the South because every time you try, it will contradict itself.
That contradiction is exactly what Marcy Cohen Ferris explores in her book, The Edible South. Ferris shows how attempts to define the South fall apart under the weight of its own opposites: privilege and poverty, hospitality and exclusion, memory and myth. And for Maeve, her first real encounter with that complexity came somewhere between rest stops and road snacks on family road trips down I-95.
I would travel to Hilton Head every year. Grandpa had a condo there, typical. And we would drive down. My family never flew. We would drive. And I remember we'd always cross the Mason-Dixon line. I'm like, what the hell is that? And they're like, oh, like, now it's the South.
She may not have known what the Mason-Dixon line really was, but crossing it meant entering a new cultural script, where food, as Ferris would say, marks borders just as much as signs on the highway. And crossing into Southern food culture came with a little shock value. Here's where Maeve starts learning the real language of the South.
Coming down here, I've learned the craziest things. Peanuts in Coke. Yeah, that was an interesting one. And I would say I'm a cookout convert for sure. I wish we had something like that in New York. Biscuits and rolls. It's very different. For me, we'll do like the Pillsbury like thing of biscuits, and I'm like, that's a biscuit, and they're like, it isn't a biscuit. I had a come to Jesus moment in the Dean Dome because like I had like the little like word out of the bread pizza, and I was like, oh my god, this is fantastic. I was like, damn, like why can't I bring this to New York?
Maeve's come to Jesus moment wasn't some spiritual awakening. It was just her realizing that Southern barbecue hits. But according to Ferris, moments like this actually matter. She calls them culinary testimonies. When a bite of food surprises you, sticks with you, maybe even changes how you see a place. Maeve came in expecting fried chicken and a KFC combo, but what she got was a buffet of contradictions.
Stuff I never expected was definitely the diversity of Southern food. Gumbo and chitlins are as Southern as, like, you know, like a cookout quesadilla. And, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's the South. But, like, those are so completely different. And I guess I never saw it for more than just, like, you know, KFC and that's it. So I would say I totally got that wrong.
When Maeve talks about the variety of Southern dishes, she's also tapping into something else Ferris emphasizes: place. In the South, food isn't just about what's on the plate, it's about where you eat it and who you eat it with. Here, fast food joints aren't just pit stops. They're hangouts, landmarks, little ecosystems of their own.
Cookout, you never really eat in the restaurant of cookout, but you will always like chill with your friends. Like you'll go with your friends, you'll park your cars together. Right. And I think that's a big thing about the South is a culture of like finding community in random spots. Even like Krispy Kreme has a certain vibe to it. The vibe of going to a Dunkin' Donuts versus going to a Krispy Kreme, completely different. Like Krispy Kreme is an experience. Like you go, you watch the donuts through the glaze, you sit down. Like Dunkin' Donuts in New York, it's like, get the fuck out. Leave. Like, you know, like no one's sitting in a Dunkin' Donuts unless you're like 80.
In the South, where you eat and who you eat with matters. Ferris calls it commensality. Maeve sees it in cookout parking lots and Krispy Kreme counters. You could say it's less about the food and more about the vibe. But the vibe is the food. Now, hold on. We're heading to Texas, where Southern culture starts wearing a 10-gallon hat and selling beaver nuggets.
Buc-ee's? I love Buc-ee's. Really? He's my friend. Like, I know him personally kind of deal. And that's, like, Texas Southern, you know what I mean? Football games for them at the high school, or, like, everyone goes, and your grandma goes with her defibrillator because she just can't freaking miss it.
Buc-ee's is a Texas-sized edible landmark. But let's bring it back to North Carolina, specifically to the Dean Dome, to pulled pork, to a moment that I can only describe from a safe, kosher distance.
So I was in the Army ROTC at the time, and I had to do volunteering for the food service. And at the end, they were like, you can take as many as you want. And I was like, fucking ate pulled pork. And then my friend, he's very Southern. His name's Armand. He's Southern as you can be when you're named Armand. And he's like, nah, like, try it with the sauce. Like, just take a bite. So I did. I literally remember, like, near tears. I ended up taking the whole tray home. I took, like, 40 freaking things of pulled pork home.
There it is again, culinary memory. The kind that surprises you and leaves an impression. But yet, there's one thing Southern food still can't get right. The water. Or more specifically, the water required to make a decent bagel.
It's all wrong from the top, okay? You simply can't make a bagel outside of New York. And I know what you're saying, this is me being a snob, but it's true. New York mineral water is different than Southern water, and because of that, dough specifically is able to become a lot less dry, more doughy, more rounded, complex, like really like holds a lot of flavor almost, but also the dryness is huge. My family takes pity on my Southern roommates. Like, I don't even have to ask them anymore. They're like, so a dozen, right? They need a dozen? You're going to the airport? Let's go get them. They need that.
To Maeve, bagels are more than breakfast or lunch. They're ritual. It's what Ferris calls edible heritage. The recipes that travel with us and remind us of who we are when we're far from home. And for Maeve, that heritage definitely includes pizza.
With pizza, you have to remove yourself from New York pizza and consider Southern pizza just a different type of food. You just have your local pizza place where I'm from. 8 pizzerias in my town alone. Mario's, Gino's, Dough & Co., whatever. It's almost like a pity thing. That sucks. New York pizza is one thing, and Southern pizza is a different type of food. Completely. That's kind of helped me move over, like, and get on. Jesus, like, you poor thing.
There's something funny about how strongly we feel about food, but it makes sense. As Ferris notes, when food travels, it changes. A bagel outside of Brooklyn just isn't the same. But not all food stories are about taste or tradition. Some are about power, about who gets included and who doesn't. And Maeve leaves us with one last truth bomb. In the South, food and race aren't separate. They're woven together, sometimes subtly, but always there.
I think it's good to look at Southern food through the lens of, I mean, I'm a white person speaking about it, right? So, like, my experiences are white, whatever. But specifically the idea of, like, Southern chains and, like, what that means to people, because I consider Chick-fil-A a Southern chain, like Chick-fil-A. But my friend Marley, who's black, was very much like Zaxby's is much more Southern. Like, Zaxby's is like a Southern, like, that's where you go for fried chicken. And it's different because, one, I didn't have Zaxby's where I'm from, but also how, like, Zaxby's is a black kind of operation. Same thing with Popeyes. It's like that's a much more black establishment compared to Chick-fil-A and Cane's is overwhelming or white, and Zaxby's, you know what I mean? So I think that's something you guys can...
And where's Marley from?
Marley's from Georgia. She's from Atlanta. Zora, too, even said Zora's from Durham, and she kind of talked about, like, Popeyes and stuff. Popeyes, Zaxby's. So I would say think about the racial stuff when it comes especially to chains, because, like, Zaxby's and Popeyes, I mean, even on Long Island, Popeyes isn't probably one of the only black towns on Long Island, and then Zaxby's as well. Like, it's just coming to Chapel Hill.
This is exactly what Ferris pushes us to consider, that food isn't neutral. Fast food chains are spaces where race, class, and power intersect. That's culinary identity. That's structural inequality. Deep fried. Maeve's perspective, equal parts honest and hilarious, remind us that Southern food is a map, not just of taste, but of memory, place, privilege, and sometimes prejudice. So next time someone tells you what Southern food is, ask who's cooking it, ask who's eating it, ask who's left out.
Before the cut, you heard all about the South from the perspective of a Northerner. Up next, the story of Beckett Kuntz, a man born and raised in the South, who, like Maeve, his college destination took him on a trip. However, for Beckett, this trip was out of the South and into the Midwest. In our interview with Beckett, we sought to get his opinions on the South and understand how his views have shifted since moving out of the South. We began our interview by asking Beckett his definition of the South and whether or not he considered it to be a cultural or geographical concept.
I feel like the northern boundary, like Virginia, Kentucky, belong there. And then it goes to Texas, and Oklahoma's dubious. Same with Florida. There's a lot of non-Southerners in Florida, if that makes sense. I feel like it's more geographical than anything.
And when asked what it means to live in the South, Beckett commented this.
I think that just there's a lot of things that will be in your life as a result of living in the South. And I think that I've seen a lot of people, like my mom did not grow up in the South, but she's taken on a lot of attributes of a Southern person, and like she has the same like tastes and that kind of stuff. And so I think that living here definitely influences, or living there, sorry, I guess I'm not there right now, but living there definitely like is different than the Midwest. And as I've discovered that a lot being here in Michigan.
So, Beckett views the South as being defined more so by geography than culture. Despite that, he's able to acknowledge that there very much is a Southern culture that one is exposed to by residing within the region. In Beckett's limited time residing up in the Midwest, he's encountered some stark differences between there and home here in North Carolina. Here's more on those differences.
I like to wave and like smile to people, and people here, they'll wave and smile, but they're like, all right, I gotta go now. There's the level of like, I know in the South, like the weird small talk conversations that you have, sometimes they will be disingenuous, but I do like them nonetheless. I think that more often than not, they leave you walking away feeling pretty good, and that's just one part of the culture that I enjoy. I think that being here in the Midwest, I think that there's a very big emphasis on some level of like individualism. Whenever you see someone on TV, the like in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, a lot of like middle American families were told to act Midwestern. And so I feel when you see that, I see a lot of people that are like acting here, not like they're on TV in like a weird way, but like I see them just not acting like Southerners and instead of acting like people I see on my TV screen, if that makes sense.
But it's not just the act that's different. The foods are too. Being from the South, I'm used to an abundance of fried chicken, biscuits and gravy, and casseroles of all varieties. But outside of the South, this abundance becomes a dearth, as Beckett comments on here.
I feel like the Midwest is a little bit more eclectic because it's in the middle, so it has like chains from around, but I think that from a chains perspective, it's not really here. I do think that like the dining hall here, at least in some regards, they try to sometimes do Southern food.
This aligns with something Maeve mentioned in her interview about Southern food being a rarity in the North, which goes to show that regional foods are leaving the regions from which they originated, but in a somewhat limited manner. This can likely be attributed to the different histories the regions experienced. The North had a large presence of Europeans, and as such, their food scene has evolved around those cultures. While the South, on the other hand, was forged from a combination of slaves bringing their culture over from West Africa, and the vast amounts of poverty that have held the region hostage through its formative years, resulting in completely different food experiences between the two areas. And while Beckett's experience of leaving the South has awakened him to the regionality of our food, our next guest is someone who has remained within the South and is finding new ways to appreciate the region which he calls home.
Sarah Stevens is from a little town called Pilot Mountain, right beside of Mount Airy, where the tea's always sweet and mac and cheese is a vegetable. She's the kind of person who grew up waving at neighbors from the porch and knows all the back roads by heart. She thinks of the South as being directly tied to the land and the people who have been tending it for generations. So whenever you think of the American South, what is it to you?
It probably is region, but it's also just typical like Southern culture. And I say typical, it can obviously vary from person to person, county to county, state to state. But I would say Southern Virginia down is typically what I would consider the South. I mostly picture by region, and then little nuances like our accent, sweet tea, tractors, farming, kind of what I was raised when it comes to Southernness.
For Sarah, those southern details, the tractors, the land, the sweet tea, they aren't just symbols. They're personal stories.
I think of farmers, the majority, specifically tobacco farmers, soybean farmers. My family grew up raising tobacco on both sides, not in a rich plantation way, but in a grunt farming way.
So what is southern food to you?
So my grandmother is the first person that I think of when I think of just like southern food in general. I grew up going to her house every Sunday for lunch with my whole family, and she would make a variety of things: fried chicken, barbecue. The sides were almost always the same: macaroni, potatoes, mashed potatoes to be specific, green beans that she got from her garden that she canned herself. And then sometimes the corn would be switched out for the macaroni. It just depended. There was almost always cornbread. Sometimes there would be greens, but no one in my family was a huge collard greens fan. There would always be tomatoes, fresh picked from the garden, refrigerator pickles, which is something that is a very southern thing to me, and homemade ketchup too, that she would make from the tomatoes from her garden. To me, she's the epitome of a southern chef.
What Sarah remembers isn't just the food. It's the ritual and the Sunday rhythm of it all. That's what makes Southern food more than just a cuisine. As Ashley Questenberry Stokes and Wendy Adkins Sayre discuss in their book Consuming Identity, Southern food is a way we reaffirm our history, our memory, and how we think of home. One of Sarah's favorite food memories involves her having a breakthrough on where she stands on the white or dark chicken meat debacle.
I think that this was it was either my 10th birthday or my 13th birthday. I asked my grandma if she would make lunch for me because my birthday was going to be on a Sunday. And I had asked her to make fried chicken, which when you do it homemade, it can be like not the easiest process in the world. I had asked her to make fried chicken and then macaroni, and then I think I just kind of wanted just like the regular like other sides, but it was just like I wanted fried chicken, macaroni, and mashed potatoes. And then I wanted a chocolate cake. And I remember she made everything that I wanted and more. I remember I went around telling my whole family, like, I asked Nita to make this for me, and she did. Like, I thought I was just like the coolest person on earth because she did. Ironically, and Willow, you know this about me, but the listeners, they don't. I don't like chicken with, like, the bone in it. In my mind, whenever I was like, oh, I wanted to make fried chicken.
Oh, no.
I just didn't have the concept in my brain that it would be, like, the bone-in chicken. Yes.
Well, what did she usually make?
See, she rarely made fried chicken because it was kind of a very...
arduous process.
Yes, and you had to do it... To make it fresh, you couldn't make it, like, the night before. Often she would start prepping a couple days before and would make things before church that Sunday and then right after before we got there. But that was only things that like bread needed to be put in the oven, things like that. The majority of it she would already have fixed or prepped as much as she could, so she just had to like put it on the stove or heat it up, etc. I honestly can't remember before that when she had last made fried chicken. I just remember like many people in my family loved her fried chicken. And I'm a big chicken fan in general. I'll eat chicken over beef 9 times out of 10. But I remember that was the first time I learned that I really only like light meat. I don't like dark meat. And then I felt super confident every time Thanksgiving rolled around and my aunt was like, do you want light or dark turkey? Light. Every time. Don't like dark meat. I can taste the darkness. It's not good. I don't like it. But I just remember how proud I was that it was just like this like perfect like southern meal looking back on it. I ate the bone-in chicken. And I think sometimes when I think back on it, like when I get like alpaca now or things like that, I think back to that moment when I like was like, oh wait, I don't like bone-in chicken, but I asked for this, so I'm going to eat it. And I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed every second of it. And I would go back and eat that meal 1,000 times if I could.
In the final act of our podcast, we wanted to shift our focus to someone whose roots go deeper into this region than most of us can imagine. Caden is a true Southerner and a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. When he talks about Southern food, he's not talking about nostalgia. He's talking about legacy.
I think that at least the way most people would think of the American South is usually like the Confederacy. That's how people think of it. It's like the traditional what percent of Confederacy, what percent of Confederacy. I usually think of it more as like the Mid-Atlantic. slash like I think of Florida as its own thing. Specifically, like South Florida is completely different from Northern Florida, but I think of it as a history of agriculture and specifically cotton, tobacco. That's where I'm from. The tobacco was a very important part of my culture. And so tobacco farming. So anywhere in which agriculture was a major byproduct, such as cash crops, I think of it as an American South. So it's usually like Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, a lot of agriculture. Do I consider myself Southerner? Yes, I have a Southern accent.
That connection to land is central to both Caden's story and to the edible South. As Marcy Cohen Ferris argues, foodways reveal the long and painful struggle of Southerners to maintain control over their nourishment and their lives. For the Lumbee, that story begins with corn.
I think Southern food is something that is defined by like agriculture, like growing around where we're from. So corn is very popular in my culture and where it's from. It originates from South America. It's called maize in some cultures. That's really important. Corn on the cob's pretty popular.
Corn is everywhere in Southern food, but its indigenous origins are often erased. Ferris reminds us that native contributions were the foundation of the colonial diet, but that indigenous people were pushed out of both land and culinary memory.
Collard wraps is very specific to my tribe. So it's basically like fried wrap with collards wrapped around it. And so you would basically like put pepper jelly and you would put collards and it's really popular. Okay. I really love that. It's a signature food that we have. It's fried in like pig fat. You use like pork to fry the stuff with it, which is really interesting. It's really good. Different people do it different ways. Pepper jelly recipes are very specific to specific families. It's really good. Fry bread is also really popular among a lot of native cultures, not specifically ours, but Cherokees love fry bread.
These foods aren't in cookbooks. They're in kitchens, in community gatherings, in memory. Cohen writes, Southern food traditions often survive through oral history, informal teaching, and communal labor. You won't find Lumbee collard wraps on a menu in Charleston or in Atlanta, but that doesn't make them less Southern. It might make them more. And if you really want to understand what Southern food means to Caden, don't ask for a recipe. Ask for his cinnamon cornbread.
We like cornbread more than that. We cook a lot of cornbread rather than fry bread. I don't know why we're on the fry bread train. Okay, so I like the ones with cinnamon. So I do the cinnamon cornbread. That's my own recipe. Different people do it a different way. My grandma and my family actually, I like the fluffy cornbread. They do the hard, right, like the circular ones where you just drop in oil. You do it like that.
Frying is another key part of the story. It's loud, indulgent, celebratory, and rooted in regional identity. Frying isn't just a technique, it's a signature of the South. As Caden reminds us, frying is one of the few things that people consistently get right about Southern food.
Me growing up, like a lot of stuff that we'll have at like a powwow or anything like that, everything is fried. I couldn't tell you necessarily why frying. I think it was convenient because you can get oil from different things such as corn oil. And so oil has been used for a very long time for like cooking. And so frying stuff is just very convenient. So I think anything fried, I could consider Southern. So like fried chicken, pretty popular. Yeah, that's normal. But like frying anything, I think is very indicative of Southern stuff. Especially now, like frying Oreo, frying, if you go to any type of fair, if you really want it authentic Southern food, go to any local farmers market or county fair, and they'll always have something good fried. Especially in Mississippi, everything they fry.
Ferris reminds us that Southern food is full of contradiction, comfort and trauma, loss and preservation. You feel that especially on Thanksgiving. The history is complicated, even ironic, but the memories are still good. The table tells both stories, who's sitting around it, and what's being passed across it.
Thanksgiving. Every single year at Thanksgiving, we cook like this huge ham, which is ironic that we celebrate Thanksgiving. I'm going to say that. But we don't cook a turkey. We cook a big ham, and we have the special recipe we do it. Then we got collards, corn on the cob. Ironically, potato salad, which is, it's weird because my culture eats a lot of potato salad, but I feel like that's more of a white thing to have like a salad with mayo and stuff like that. Not our thing, but it works. I love Thanksgiving.
Caden's story reminds us that Southern food isn't a monolith. It's layered with history, place, and identity. From tobacco fields to collard wraps, from cinnamon cornbread to fried Oreos, Every dish tells us something about who we are and where we've been. Like Marcy Cohen Ferris writes, Southern food is never just food, it's a story, and we're all just trying to take a bite.
After sitting with all these voices, it's clear there's no single answer for what the South is and what counts as its food.
For some, it's fried chicken on Sunday after church.
For others, it's a place of rediscovery, resistance, or even rejection.
Southern food isn't just a menu. It's a vessel for memory and meaning.
Whether you're sitting at a grandmother's table, unpacking cultural baggage, or questioning whether the South is home to a distinct culture, Southern food carries stories.
Thanks for heating the skillet with us today. Until next time, keep the stories sizzling.